You know, everyone, when you do a crossover, if you will, everybody looks forward to it. Everybody, doesn't matter where the crossover takes place in. Doesn't matter where it takes place or how it takes place. Everybody looks forward to it. Because it's a crossover they've either haven't seen before, or it's something that they've been wanting to see no matter what media they're going to see it in. Well, with Worlds Collide, the upcoming Sonic and Mega Man crossover, a lot of people are talking about it. And fairly, there's a lot of people, and very fairly, there's a lot of people that are looking forward to it. And then, of course, there are those that are not looking forward to it. Now, there's also a group of people that are looking forward to it, but feel as though it could have been done after a current arc or story arc was done in at least one of the comics that's crossing over into it. In this case, Sonic the Hedgehog. Now, what I mean is, today, here on YouTube, or yesterday I should say, on YouTube, I uploaded a video for Sonic News for yesterday the 14th and today the 15th. Basically describing what was coming courtesy of the comics. And I mentioned 247 was part 1 of At All Cost. Now, you would think that part 2 would follow shortly after, right? You would think that, right? You would think part 2 would follow shortly after. But unfortunately it doesn't. Now unless part 2 takes place in issue 50 of Sonic Universe and nobody's telling us that will be a complete surprise. But because of the main story arc that's been involved in this comic since October of last year, it makes pretty good sense, or pretty much makes a lot of sense, that the conclusion to the story arc would end in the main comic. Now again, you would think obviously that part 2 would be, well, taking place within the next issue or so, in the following issue. Unfortunately, that won't be the case, because apparently what's happening is 247, the first part, is going to be following the same direction, basically the same route as this. That's right. You see, 225 concluded with a cliffhanger that saw Sally completely shot dead off panel. Now, just like 247, it has a countdown on it. This one has the countdown number of 1. That was to Genesis. The same thing with 247, which is countdown to Worlds Collide. Now, does this make sense to go the same route they've gone before? Well, in the eyes of one fan over at the SatAM Sonic forums, where I posted some links about this as well, it probably is the best idea, because it will, believe it or not, get fans talking. And as much as anybody would say, oh, that's not true, you have to agree on it, because it would get people talking. Especially when the Solidus, or the Solidus, whatever you call it, the preview, basically states, the index preview states in the description at the end that the ending of the issue will be explosive. An explosive ending that will rock Sonic's world. So you gotta think, if it's saying an explosive ending that will shock Sonic's world, it makes you think. Now, you might say to yourself, well, what are they going to do? Blow Sally up and then Sonic has to go fight Mega Man and then come back and do this whole thing again? Well, when you have a time-traveling hedgehog like Silver on your side, there's a possibility. But perhaps, as some people might have stated, there's a chance that this crossover could have something to do with the story arc. I know that sounds crazy, and I know not a lot of people want to hear it, but it is true. There's a slight possibility, if not a strong possibility, that this story arc, that this crossover will have something to do with the story arc. Because you gotta think of it this way. If Sally is going to be restored, you gotta think, obviously, you gotta put yourself maybe in Ian Flynn's shoes and think that perhaps you gotta go outside the box to find an answer. Now, one person, Prime, that I said, this is what Prime mentioned on his. He said that by judging by the text preview for 247 Part 1, 247 is indeed Part 1. He says, so with 248 being part of the crossover, we gotta wait until 242 at least for the second part. It's most likely that 247 will end on a cliffhanger with something quote-unquote terrible happening to cause an uproar in the fandom. The fandom has to wait 4 months until the crossover. The fandom has to wait 4 months with the crossover in effect to see what happens next. And when 252 comes around, the cliffhanger of 247 is dealt with to move on with the story if this happens. Or as he puts it, quickly dealt with to move on with the story if this happens. Then Flynn, Ian Flynn, is repeating the whole Genesis arc again. Except this time the payoff will nowhere be shocking, or nowhere be as shocking or impressive, because we've already known for a good few months already that Sally will be back to normal. No matter what happens, we know she'll be fine. And he continues, this is what Prime says at the Saturday AM Sonic forums, FUS if you will, Fans United for Saturday AM. He says, if he does choose to go that route, then it's understandable, because of how, quote-unquote, well it worked before. And I say, quote-unquote, well, as in it got a shit ton of people talking about the comic. Not in actual terms of how well it was executed. In other words, he's saying what happened with the whole Genesis thing, 25, and, waiting between Genesis and all that, it got people talking about the comic. And basically, this is what he's saying. He's saying it's going to have this situation coming up is going to have the same effect. But this is what it says, and again I quote, and as I said, and I say well, as in it got a shit ton of people talking about the comic, not in actual terms of how well it was executed. And if he does go that way, well, then it's pretty damn lazy. I guess it's like a successful movie franchise with a simple premise to it. Just keep repeating the same old shit over and over again because it works. James Bond has been getting away with it for 50 years. So in other words, what he's saying is that should they go a similar route like they did with 25, then doing Genesis, and then kind of doing the cliffhanger, and then kind of resolving it and all that, and then starting this arc with 230, basically it would sort of be like repeating the same thing over and over again, and not a lot of fans obviously are real fans of things repeating, of things happening again and again and again. But as a lot of people have said, if that's what gets people talking, but it's like you said, if that's what's going to get people talking about the comic, then so be it. Because you got to remember this. You got to think of this, folks. There's not a lot of people that will look up the previews for upcoming issues to comic books, either they're based on franchises or not. Because those are the kind of people that would rather be surprised. It's kind of like with wrestling. You know, there's a group of guys. There's a group called the Off the Ropes Show on YouTube. And one of the lead members of the Off the Ropes Show doesn't read the spoilers of either the SmackDown or TNA Impact tapings because he wants to be surprised. He wants to be caught off guard. And that's exactly what I'm talking about with perhaps, this situation here and what Prime said right there. Basically the fact that there are going to be those that are fans of the comic of Sonic the Hedgehog and of Sonic Universe and maybe even Mega Man that won't want to look at the covers or read the preview text or read the index preview and just wait for it to come out so they can be totally surprised. And again, that's understandable. That's perfectly understandable, from anybody that's a fan of the comic or fan of comic books in general. But there's also something else that plays into this. The way this is, when you take a look at the schedule, and I'll provide a link to the picture from TSSZ in the photo gallery from this year's New York Comic Con. When you take a look at the scheduling, it shows that August will be the last issue in this crossover. So basically what you'll be looking at is September 2013 for a resolve. In other words, this will complete exactly what Ian Flynn set out to do. Ian Flynn said that this would be double the length of Iron Dominion. And by September 2013, Ian Flynn will have achieved his goal. It will have doubled the length of Iron Dominion. And the reason it would have doubled the length is because that's what Ian Flynn set out to do. So in other words, it'll come full circle for Ian Flynn for achieving his goal. And you're all probably asking, well, why didn't he just say he was going to go that length in the first place? Why did he make up excuses saying, saying things like, the crossover and the Olympic tie-ins and the video game adaptions are all beyond my control? Why didn't he just say he was going to go all the way to September of 2013 with the story? I think the reason is because, again, I've said this in many videos before, and I've even said it I've even typed it up in text. He's got you in the palm of his hands. He's got you right where he wants you, and he's got you believing and thinking what he wants you to believe and think. Now, with all due respect to the guy, I will say it's a very ambitious project and venture and journey that he's taken everybody on. Let's just hope that this is all worth it in the end. Because basically what he's doing is what any writer, new, up-and-coming, or veteran likes to do, and that's create a story arc that defines their legacy and their run on a certain comic book or with a certain comic book company. So, but that is basically an update on the upcoming Against All Odds story arc and part 1 for 247. Comment down below, let me know what you guys think, and I'll talk to you all later.